Welcome to Tomorrow Unveiled, where we take the fire hose of information that defines the energy transition and distill it down to the essential, game-changing developments you need to know about. This week, we are witnessing, well, a fundamental shift in global energy strategy. It's pretty big.
It really is. And it's being driven not just by climate policy anymore, but by something sudden and non-negotiable, this explosion in digital demand.
Right, so that narrative that really dominated the last decade, focused on gradual, sometimes low-density, intermittent renewables.
Yeah, that whole approach seems to have hit a wall. The sources our dedicated research team compiled, they show this pivot. A pivot towards high-density power that's, frankly, becoming mandatory.
Okay, let's unpack this high-density imperative. Our central idea for Tomorrow Unveiled today is green code, hot core. So what exactly is the green code and why is it forcing the issue right now?
So the green code, it's basically this explosive high availability power demand. Think 99.99% plus uptime needed. Yeah, and it's coming from the global digital economy. We're talking hyperscale data centers, AI training models running constantly, advanced semiconductor manufacturing.
These aren't just large loads, are they? They're massive concentrated loads.
Exactly. And they need that power availability that's almost perfect.
That availability requirement, that's really key, isn't it? These systems, they just can't blink.
Not at all.
They need immense power, but also in an incredibly small geographical footprint. We're not talking about, sprawling solar fields covering square miles.
No. Think megawatts packed onto a single acre. If you're training a massive AI model or running a critical cloud service, the power has to be absolutely firm, totally reliable 2047.
And that unique, dense demand profile, that's what necessitates the hot core.
Precisely. The hot core is, let's call it a suite of technologies. High density, high temperature, firm, always on clean power.
So what kind of tech are we talking about here?
Primarily advanced nuclear fission, especially small modular reactors or SMRs. Then there's fusion energy, when it fully arrives commercially, and also revolutionary high-density storage, both thermal and chemical.
Because the low-density intermittent sources,
they
just can't meet this kind of massive, instantaneous, firm load, not with that kind of uptime requirement.
They simply can't do it alone. Not reliably enough for these critical digital infrastructures.
So the developments we're tracking, just from these first 2 weeks of November 2025, you're saying this is really an inflection point.
Absolutely. It's not just one country making a move or one company signing a deal. The corroboration is global, it's comprehensive. Our research team really prioritized those findings that kept popping up in, almost all the documents they reviewed. It confirms this definitive, coordinated global shift.
So our mission here on Tomorrow Unveiled is to show you how major capital, and we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars here, and policy has suddenly aligned.
Right, aligned to solve the energy needs of this AI era.
It feels like the whole challenge has moved almost overnight from, policy debates and white papers.
Straight into industrial execution.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's about building things now.
What's fascinating, too, is how quickly the marketplace seems to have grasped this, the necessity of the shift.
Oh, completely. The AI revolution isn't waiting around for the energy transition to catch up. It's actually dictating the terms now.
Yeah.
The sheer scale and, frankly, the speed of this new demand signal. It's forcing governments, financiers, everyone to prioritize density, reliability, and maybe above all, speed of deployment.
Okay, let's start with the commercial validation then, because this is really where that hot core thesis goes from being, strategic foresight to hard, bankable reality. This demand signal from the green code AI data centers is now explicitly driving the procurement of carbon-free baseload power.
It really is. And you could argue it's the highest quality demand signal the nuclear sector has ever seen. Ever.
High quality.
Because the data compiled by our research team shows that for these massive data centers, proximity to the power source is almost as valuable as the power itself. Less transmission loss, better security.
Right.
And critically, this high-density, high-availability demand, as we said, it can't be met by traditional intermittent sources alone. If you're running a, say, $50 billion data center complex, you need power 99.99% of the time, maybe more. And you need to know exactly where that supply is coming from reliably for the next 20, maybe 30 years.
Okay, and nothing demonstrates that commercial urgency more clearly than what looks like the largest SMR deployment program in U.S. history, this TVA ENTRA1 deal.
That's the one. The Tennessee Valley Authority TVA and a company called ENTRA1 Energy, They've agreed to deploy up to 6 gigawatts of NUS-scale SMR capacity.
6 gigawatts. Let's just pause on that. That is huge.
It's truly monumental. To give you some perspective, that's enough to power several million homes. Or, put another way, it's like building 5 major existing nuclear power plant complexes.
Wow.
But the why behind the procurement is what's critical here. The mandate is explicit. This massive capacity is being secured specifically to meet the surging demand from, and they list it: AI data centers, critical mining, semiconductor manufacturing.
The core components of the Green Code.
Exactly. It's right there in the agreement.
That phrase, explicitly procured, that really feels like the inflection point, doesn't it? It means the utility isn't just planning for, like, gradual population growth over decades.
No. They are planning for a massive, sudden, technology-driven load spike. ENTRA1 and TVA estimated the single commitment could power roughly, get this, 60 new data centers.
60. Just from this one deal. The market is finally rewarding the specific characteristics of SMRs then.
Precisely. Why NUS-scale? Why SMRs for this specific Green Code demand? Well, modularity is key.
Right, you don't have to wait 15 years to build one massive 4 GW plant.
Exactly. You can deploy smaller units, maybe 77 megawatts each for NUS-scale's design, closer to where the demand actually is, closer to those data center clusters. It offers flexibility, scalability, vital when AI demand is accelerating so unpredictably.
And the passive safety features must play a role too.
Absolutely. The ability to passively cool and manage these smaller reactors, even during station blackouts, makes them ideal for decentralized, high-value industrial applications where any interruption is catastrophic. This deal commercially validates the hot core as, essentially, the default power source for the AI revolution.
The structure of the deal itself sounds pretty revolutionary too. ENTRA1 handles development, ownership, operation.
Right. And TVA just buys the power through long-term power purchase agreements, or PPAs.
So it transfers that huge initial capital risk away from TVA, the regulated public utility.
And onto ENTRA1, a private, specialized infrastructure developer. That strategic transfer of risk is absolutely key to making this scale possible.
Okay, so that's a massive demand pull from the utility side. Now, speaking of scale and finance, we have to talk about this $80 billion strategic partnership led by the U.S. government, Westinghouse, Brookfield Asset Management, and Cameco.
Yeah, this is huge. Arguably the most significant industrial mobilization for nuclear in the West since maybe the 1970s.
$80 billion. It's
Right.
just a staggering figure. And it's mobilizing financing for a whole new fleet of Westinghouse reactors, right? Not just one project.
Correct. Both the proven AP1000 design and their newer AP300 SMR. But you're right, this isn't just a funding deal for a single plant. Think of it as full-scale industrial policy. It's designed to reconstruct the Western nuclear supply chain, which, let's be honest, has largely withered over the last 4 decades.
And the genius of it seems to be this integrated model. It targets the historical problems of nuclear construction head-on.
Yeah.
Delays, cost overruns, supply chain insecurity.
Exactly. Each partner is there to mitigate a specific risk. The government provides facilitation, policy backstops, and, crucially, regulatory speed. We'll definitely dig into that more later. Westinghouse obviously brings the validated reactor technology.
But the two biggest levers for de-risking here seem to be finance and fuel. Brookfield Asset Management.
World-leading private infrastructure investor. They bring massive scale, billions in capital, yes, but critically, deep expertise in managing these kinds of long-term, high-capital projects.
So they're treating these reactors less like speculative utility projects and more like toll roads or pipelines.
That's a great analogy. Long-term, stable, cash-flowing infrastructure. It removes a lot of the volatility and regulatory uncertainty that historically scared off traditional financing for nuclear.
And then there's Cameco handling the fuel side.
Right. By securing the entire Western-sourced uranium supply chain mining, conversion, enrichment, this partnership insulates the new fleet from geopolitical instability, particularly, reliance on Russian or other non-allied fuel sources.
Which is a major concern right now.
A huge concern. The stated goal here is to create a repeatable process for fleet construction, moving away from those costly, bespoke, one-off nuclear projects.
Towards something more standardized, factory-supported assembly.
Exactly. That's the only way to bring costs down and speeds up.
Okay, so we have the supply push with the $80 billion partnership and the regulated demand pull with the TVA ENTRA1 deal. But maybe the most fascinating financial innovation is this non-traditional demand pull. The Google NextEra restart.
Oh, this one is genuinely game-changing, especially if you're in finance. Google has struck a deal with NextEra Energy to restart the Duane Arnold Energy Center in Iowa. It's a 610 milliW plant that actually shut down back in 2020.
Restarting a closed nuclear plant, that sounds complex.
Yeah.
And fast, potentially.
It is complex, but the timeline is aiming to be rapid. The core innovation, though, is financial. Google is providing upfront capital through a 25-year power purchase agreement.
A 25-year PPA, so Google's essentially becoming the anchor tenant, guaranteeing revenue for a quarter century.
Precisely, to power their massive cloud and AI infrastructure in the region.
That completely flips the script on nuclear financing, doesn't it?
It really does. Historically, these projects stalled because you needed billions up front, but had no guaranteed revenue for maybe 10, 15 years while you built the thing, made them basically unbankable for many investors.
But Google's 25-year PPA.
It addresses that long-tail risk entirely. By securing guaranteed long-term revenue from a, AAA-rated tech giant, the project's financial viability transforms overnight.
It's not a speculative utility project anymore.
It's a guaranteed infrastructure play backed by one of the world's largest companies.
That's the green code, literally solving the financial challenge of the hot core. And it allows the plant to potentially be back online by, what was the timeline? Early 2029.
That's the target, a 4-year timeline to restart a nuclear facility. In the U.S. context, that is stunningly rapid.
So the tech industry, acting as this long-term guaranteed customer, is effectively absorbing the initial financial risk and accelerating timelines in a way regulators previously couldn't.
It's a powerful new model. Okay, so moving from the financial structures underpinning all this, let's talk about the technology itself, the foundation. The hot core relies on advanced fission reactors that promise to be inherently safer, more efficient.
And that's crucial, right? Both regulatory acceptance and public buy-in hinge on demonstrating that technological maturity, especially around fuel and safety systems.
Absolutely, which means we have to talk about the fuel itself, the physical state of it. Let's start with these revolutionary fuel breakthroughs, specifically the TRISO-X testing.
Right. Xenergy just started 13 months of pretty rigorous irradiation testing of their proprietary TRISO-X fuel pebbles. This is happening at Idaho National Laboratory, INL.
Yeah, this is a massive step towards commercial qualification for their X100 reactor design. And the material science here is what fundamentally changes the safety equation.
Okay, break down TRISO for us.
TRISO stands for tristructural isotropic. Basically, you have these tiny fuel kernels, smaller than a poppy seed, made of uranium oxide fuel. Each tiny kernel is then encased in 3 layers of ceramic coating.
3 layers.
Yes. And the critical layer is silicon carbide, which is incredibly tough, incredibly heat resistant. These coated particles are then embedded into larger graphite pebbles, about the size of a billiard ball.
Wait, so the fuel itself is basically protected by its own miniature ceramic containment shell, designed to withstand extreme heat.
That's exactly it. This tri-layer ceramic coating means the fuel cannot melt in a commercial high-temperature reactor, even under the most extreme accident scenarios you can realistically imagine.
Cannot melt. That's a bold claim.
It is, but it's based on decades of testing. Because the containment is at the microscopic particle level, it prevents the release of radioactive fission products, even if the plant loses all power, all cooling. This inherent or passive safety feature is absolutely crucial.
For gaining public trust, obviously, but also for regulatory speed, right? If you can definitively prove your fuel's meltdown-proof.
The entire risk calculation for the regulator changes fundamentally. That level of safety is central to the hot core's potential to be sited closer to industrial loads like those data centers we talked about, or even closer to population centers eventually.
Okay, so that's a huge safety advancement. But what about the supply chain for these advanced fuels? Many next-gen reactors need something different from traditional fuel, don't they?
They do. Many of the smaller, more efficient designs require what's called high-assay low-enriched uranium, or aka LEU. That's uranium enriched to between 5% and 20% uranium-235. Traditional fuel is below 5%.
And why is AKLEU so important?
Its higher enrichment allows for smaller reactor cores, which is great for SMRs. It also allows for higher burnup, meaning you get more energy out of the fuel and produce less waste per unit of energy. Plus, you can potentially go longer between refueling outages.
Which is a huge economic advantage.
A massive economic advantage. So this week, we saw a really key milestone here. Framatome and Terrapower announced the successful production of AKLEU metal at Framatome's facility in Richland, Washington.
HAU metal. Specifically, why is that important?
Because some advanced reactor designs, like Terrapower's Natrium reactor, which uses liquid sodium as a coolant, require the fuel in metallic form, not the more common oxide form. Establishing a domestic capability to produce this HAU metal fuel is absolutely mandatory for the U.S. advanced reactor fleet.
Otherwise, the entire industry would be reliant on foreign sources.
Currently, Russia is the only major commercial supplier of HAU. So without this domestic production capability, taking HAU oxide and converting it into the necessary metal form, it would completely undermine the energy security goals of deploying these advanced reactors. This de-risks major projects like Natrium.
But not all advanced reactors need HAU, right? Some designers are making a different strategic choice.
That's right. And that brings us to the SALEU strategy. SALEU stands for Standard Assay Low Enriched Uranium.
So less than 5% enrichment, the stuff used in existing reactors?
Exactly. Terrestrial Energy, which is developing an integral molten salt reactor, or IMSR, signed an expanded contract with Westinghouse this week for an IMSR fuel pilot plant. And their strategy specifically leverages ALEU.
Why go with SALEU if ALEU offers advantages?
It's a strategic trade-off. Using readily available SALEU is a massive cost and supply chain advantage right now.
Because that fuel infrastructure already exists globally.
Precisely. It mitigates the immediate supply risks associated with ALEU, which still needs a full commercial supply chain built out. And it avoids the significant regulatory hurdles, security measures, and capital costs associated with building entirely new ALEU manufacturing and handling facilities.
So it's a more practical, maybe faster pathway to commercial deployment for their molten salt reactor, using existing industrial foundations.
That seems to be their bet. It demonstrates a kind of bifurcated approach emerging. ALEU for maybe smaller, more specialized designs needing peak performance, and SALEU for designs prioritizing faster commercialization and leveraging the existing mature fuel supply chain.
Interesting. Okay. While the U.S. and its allies are clearly ramping up, this advanced fission race is definitely global. China's making some significant moves, particularly with thorium fuel.
Yes, the Chinese Academy of Sciences announced they achieved the world's first successful conversion of thorium into fissile uranium fuel inside their experimental thorium molten salt reactor, the TMSR LF1.
Thorium. That's been talked about for decades as a potential nuclear fuel. Why is this significant now?
It's proof of concept for actually breeding fuel in the reactor. Thorium itself isn't fissile, but it can absorb a neutron and become uranium-233, which is an excellent nuclear fuel.
And the geopolitical angle.
China has vast domestic reserves of thorium. If they can successfully leverage this technology at scale, it could drastically reduce their reliance on imported uranium. Right now, they import over 80% of their nuclear fuel needs.
So this potentially shifts their energy security profile quite fundamentally.
It could. Plus, their molten salt design allows for continuous online refueling without shutting down the reactor, which boosts capacity factor and economics. They're aiming to scale this to a 10 milliW demonstration reactor within 5 years, targeting commercial viability soon after. It positions them right at the forefront of potentially using this fourth-generation indigenous fuel source.
Okay, let's jump across the pond to the UK. They're finalizing their SMR commitment.
They are. The UK government confirmed that Wylfa, a site on the Isle of Anglesey in Wales with a long nuclear history, will host Britain's first Rolls-Royce SMRs.
And how many are they planning there?
3 units initially, each rated at 470 megawatts electric. Site activity is slated to start in 2026, with first power delivery targeted by the mid-2030s.
Mid-2030s. That aligns with a lot of these timelines, and the Rolls-Royce approach emphasizes factory manufacturing, right?
Absolutely central to their concept. Building major components, the reactor vessels, steam generators, etc., in a controlled factory environment, shipping them to site, and then assembling them rapidly.
Like building airplanes or ships, rather than traditional construction.
Exactly. This modular approach is designed explicitly to avoid the massive delays and crippling cost overruns that have haunted large, bespoke nuclear projects in the past. It's really the only way they believe they can hit these aggressive deployment timelines needed to meet climate goals and potentially green code demands.
All this technology, all this policy, it still requires physical stuff. Raw components, specialized materials. Which means we have to look at supply chain solidification. These projects just don't happen without massive component contracts being signed.
Absolutely critical. And we saw a big one this week. Xenergy finalized a $40 million definitive supply agreement with Toyotanso, a Japanese firm.
For what specific component?
For critical fine-grained graphite components. specifically a type called IG-110 isotropic graphite. This material is absolutely essential for the structure and safety of their X100 high-temperature gas-cooled reactor.
Why is graphite so critical for that design?
In the reactor core, it acts as both a structural element holding the fuel pebbles and as the moderator slowing down neutrons. But more importantly, in the very high-temperature environment of the X100, we're talking upwards of 750 degrees Celsius. This specific graphite needs to maintain its structural integrity and properties under intense heat and neutron bombardment for decades.
So getting this specific high-performance graphite is a long-lead item.
A very long-lead, highly specialized material. Securing this supply now for their first planned 4-unit deployment, which is slated for the Longmont Generating Station site in Texas, is a crucial de-risking step for Xenergy. If you can't get the specialized graphite, you simply can't build the reactor. This deal confirms the supply chain is starting to respond to these multi-gigawatt demand signals.
And that Texas project is part of a bigger picture for Xenergy and tech companies, isn't it?
It is. The research team confirms that Xenergy and Amazon are collaborating towards deploying potentially over 5 GW of new nuclear capacity by 2039.
5 gigawatts. Again, massive scale.
It shows how the Green Code's need for stable, huge amounts of clean power is directly translating into these multi-billion-dollar industrial commitments, cascading right down through the supply chain.
And just a quick reminder for our listeners, if you're listening on a podcast service like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a rating and review for Tomorrow Unveiled. It truly helps us reach new listeners and allows us to keep exploring these complex topics with the detail they deserve. We're constantly reviewing the global consensus on these game-changing developments, and your support really helps us continue these deep dives.
Okay, so while advanced fission, like SMRs and these new fuel types, is tackling the immediate Green Code problem, the sort of ultimate holy grail for the hot core, limitless, clean, dense power. That's fusion.
The power of the stars bottled on Earth.
Exactly. And the developments this week show a pretty significant strategic pivot, certainly in the US, but also globally, towards the commercialization of fusion energy. It feels like it's moving decisively from being purely a physics experiment towards becoming an industrial engineering project.
And the centerpiece of that pivot seems to be the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, releasing its new Fusion Science and Technology Roadmap.
That's right. For decades, as you know, fusion was famously always 20 years away.
Right. The running joke.
Well, this roadmap changes that narrative quite drastically. The biggest shift is the timeline. It sets an aggressive, hard goal: deliver commercial fusion power to the grid by the mid-2030s.
Mid-2030s. That's incredibly ambitious. That's barely a decade away.
It is incredibly ambitious. And importantly, this isn't framed as just a scientific aspiration anymore. It's being treated as an industrial target. They've laid out this unified vision. They call it the Build, Innovate, Grow framework.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's about coordinating the government's efforts, the national labs, much more closely with the private sector. And the private sector has already poured over $9 billion into various fusion startups. This roadmap aims to align everyone towards that common mid-2030s goal.
So it signals a shift away from just focusing on the pure physics problem, achieving ignition, getting more energy out than in.
Which has now been demonstrated multiple times, albeit briefly.
Right. So the shift is now towards the engineering problems, building a practical, reliable power plant that can actually run continuously.
Absolutely. Ignition is proven science now. The bottleneck has shifted. Now the focus is squarely on solving critical engineering and materials science gaps.
Like what specifically?
The biggest one is developing materials that can actually withstand the extreme conditions inside a burning fusion reactor for long periods. We're talking about surviving massive neutron bombardment, intense heat fluxes, complex plasma interactions.
Because if the reactor is meant to run for 30 or 40 years like a power plant, the structural components inside the first wall, the diverter, they can't become brittle or fail after just a few years of being blasted by neutrons and heat.
Precisely. That's the core engineering challenge right now. Building the vessel, the containment structure, that can reliably handle confining what is essentially the core of a star day in, day out. We're seeing new research grants, like some announced at the University of California, explicitly focused on designing and testing novel metal alloys and ceramics that might exhibit the needed resilience in these high-flux environments. This is where the commercialization timeline will ultimately succeed or fail in the materials science and engineering.
It's fascinating, too, how the Green Code, the demands of the digital world, seems to be driving advances even in fusion research. specifically this convergence of AI and fusion.
Yes, our research team flagged some major steps being reported towards achieving steady, long-duration fusion reactions, and they're using artificial intelligence to do it.
AI controlling fusion. How does it work?
Well, in China's HL3 tokamak reactor, they're reporting success using advanced AI models, specifically things like long short-term memory or LSTM neural networks for real-time plasma control.
Okay, what does plasma control mean in this context?
The plasma, that superheated state of matter, millions of degrees, inside the tokamak, it's inherently unstable. It wriggles, it develops hotspots, it can suddenly disrupt. If it touches the reactor walls, the reaction quenches, the experiment ends.
Right.
These AI models can analyze sensor data incredibly fast, predict potential instabilities before they happen, and then adjust the magnetic field parameters, tweaking the invisible magnetic bottle holding the plasma in real time, often within microseconds, faster than any human operator could possibly react.
So the AI is essentially taming the plasma on the fly.
That's the idea. This rapid predictive control is seen as a huge leap towards enabling the much longer controlled fusion burns needed for sustained net energy output, which is essential for commercial viability.
That's a perfect synergy, isn't it? The smart software of the green code helping to tame the intense energy of the hot core.
It really is. And meanwhile, on the diagnostic side, things are also getting more practical. Researchers at Texas Tech University reported a breakthrough, creating the first practical semiconductor detector specifically for fusion neutrons.
Why is detecting neutrons important? And why semiconductor?
You absolutely need accurate, real-time measurements of the neutron flux inside the reactor. It tells you how much fusion is happening, helps you manage tritium breeding, which is fuel for some fusion types, and monitors how the reactor materials are holding up under the neutron bombardment. Traditional neutron detectors are often bulky, expensive, and complex.
Okay.
These Texas Tech researchers used hexagonal boron nitride crystals, a type of semiconductor, to create a reliable, miniature detector. Being small and semiconductor-based means they could potentially be deployed much more widely inside and around a reactor, making control and health monitoring far more practical and affordable. It's an essential piece for building compact, manageable fusion power plants.
Okay, let's pivot now to high-density storage. Because the hot core imperative isn't just about splitting atoms or fusing them, it's also about storing massive amounts of energy densely. And we're seeing incredible commercial traction in a sector that's historically been very challenging: decarbonizing industrial heat.
Yes, this is really exciting. The key development here is Rondo Energy's heat battery. Their first commercial-scale unit, a 100 megawatt-hour thermal battery in California, has just entered full commercial operation.
A heat battery. What does it store heat in?
It's brilliantly simple in concept. It uses electricity, ideally cheap renewable electricity when it's abundant, to heat up refractory blanks. Think of them as highly specialized ceramic blocks, similar to what's used in industrial furnaces, along with resistive heating elements.
Okay.
They store this energy as sensible heat at extremely high temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
1,000 degrees C, that temperature is critical, isn't it? Because that's the kind of heat needed for heavy industrial processes, making cement, steel, glass, food processing.
Exactly. Those industries currently rely almost entirely on burning natural gas or other fossil fuels to get that high-grade heat. And this Rondo system boasts a round-trip electrical efficiency of over 97% if you convert the heat back to power. But more importantly for industry, it delivers the heat directly with very high efficiency.
So it's not really competing with lithium-ion batteries for grid stabilization. Its target is different.
Precisely. It's optimized for electricity in, high-temperature heat out, directly targeting industrial heat, which accounts for something like a quarter of global energy consumption and has been notoriously difficult and expensive to decarbonize.
And the commercial model here is what really seems to be the breakthrough, this heat-as-a-service idea, Haas.
Yes. The partnership they announced with Heineken in Portugal is the blueprint. Rondo provides and operates the thermal battery technology. A utility partner, in this case EDP, provides the low-cost solar power to charge it. And together, they sell zero-carbon steam directly to the Heineken brewery under a long-term contract.
So Heineken, the industrial user, they don't have to pay the massive upfront capital cost, CapEx, to install and integrate this novel energy system into their plant.
Exactly. They just pay a predictable operating expense, OpEx, for the guaranteed delivery of clean steam, just like they used to pay for natural gas, but now it's zero carbon.
That completely de-risks the decarbonization process for the industrial company. It transforms what could have been a bespoke, complex, multi-million-dollar factory upgrade.
Into a standardized, bankable utility product. Clean heat, delivered reliably. This Haas model opens up a clear, replicable commercial pathway to decarbonize these hard-to-abate industrial sectors globally. It makes it financially attractive, not just environmentally necessary.
Okay, finally in this section, we saw a major high-density shift in grid storage itself, away from just lithium-ion towards sodium-ion batteries.
That's right. A company called Peak Energy and Jupiter Power announced a huge deal for up to 4.75 GW of sodium-ion battery systems. That's the largest deployment globally for sodium-ion to date.
4.75 gigawatt hours. That's utility scale. Why sodium-ion? What are the advantages over lithium-ion?
Two critical strategic advantages are being highlighted. First, potentially superior degradation performance over a 20-year lifespan, meaning they might last longer and maintain capacity better, which lowers lifetime costs.
Okay.
Second, and perhaps even more importantly from a strategic perspective, sodium-ion batteries utilize much more abundant and domestically sourced materials. Sodium is everywhere. Think salt.
Right. Unlike lithium, cobalt, nickel, where supply chains are concentrated in specific regions and politically sensitive.
Exactly. This move towards sodium-ion represents a high-density storage option that significantly enhances domestic supply chain resilience for the U.S. It ties directly into that broader strategic theme of needing energy independence and secure, diversified resource chains, which underpins the whole hot core concept. So all these massive technological leaps, these huge commercial deals we've been discussing, they aren't happening in a vacuum, are they?
No, not at all. They're being aggressively supported, maybe even mandated in some ways, by a really sweeping overhaul of regulatory and policy frameworks, particularly in the U.S., but also among allied nations.
It feels like the sheer pressure from the Green Code, this urgent need for power, has essentially forced governments to hit the accelerator on the regulatory clock, dramatically.
And this is where we really need to confront the historical inertia, especially around nuclear licensing. For decades, getting a new reactor design license through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, in the U.S., well, it was notoriously a multi-decade process.
Often taking more than a decade just for the paper approvals before you even broke ground. And those delays directly contributed to the massive cost overruns we saw on projects like Plant Vogtle in Georgia.
That historical context is absolutely crucial for understanding just how dramatic some of this week's announcements really are. You mentioned DOE and NRC leaders speaking.
Yes, at the American Nuclear Society Winter Conference. They were very public, very blunt, stressing the need for a paradigm shift in regulatory thinking. The goal, apparently backed by executive orders now, is to establish fixed, predictable deadlines.
Fixed deadlines for nuclear licensing.
That's what they're aiming for, specifically. 18 months for new advanced reactor licensing and 12 months for license renewals for existing plants.
18 months. Compared to the 10 or 15 years that process often took historically, that's revolutionary if they can actually achieve it.
It absolutely is. It signals that the government now views the regulatory delay itself as a major strategic liability in this global race to power the AI economy and meet decarbonization goals. Speed is paramount.
And they're not just relying on the existing NRC process to suddenly speed up, are they? There's talk of a parallel path.
Exactly. The DOE is actively building this parallel pathway through its nuclear reactor pilot program. They're using specific authority granted under the Atomic Energy Act authority that allows the DOE itself to authorize the construction and operation of test and demonstration reactors.
So effectively bypassing the traditional multi-decade NRC commercial licensing process, at least for these initial advanced demonstration reactors.
That seems to be the strategy. Create a faster-moving sandbox, if you will. Accept a degree of calculated risk in exchange for rapid deployment, rapid learning, and collecting real-world operational data on these new designs much faster.
It confirms that speed has become arguably the single most important metric for this hot core build-out, prioritized even over long-established bureaucratic processes.
It certainly appears that way. Now, we also need to connect this domestic policy pivot to the broader global competition, particularly in how the U.S. is reframing the whole idea of sustainability, looking through the lens of critical materials.
All right, the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, updated its official critical minerals list this week. What changed, and why does it matter for energy?
The list itself saw some significant additions: silicon, tellurium, copper, and most critically for our discussion today, uranium was added to the list.
Okay, uranium being added to a critical minerals list might not sound surprising on its own, but the strategic implication is how it's grouped, right?
Exactly. The context is key. By placing the core materials needed for low-density renewables, silicon and tellurium for solar panels, copper for wiring everything, and the core material for high-density nuclear uranium all onto the same critical list, the government is effectively justifying the hot core pivot on the grounds of supply chain security and resource diversification.
So it's not just about climate anymore, it's about national security and avoiding dangerous dependencies.
Precisely. The USGS report explicitly highlighted the geostrategic risk posed by the solar industry's overwhelming reliance, over 80%, on Chinese processed silicon.
So the U.S. government is now officially acknowledging that a massive, rapid shift solely to solar, given current manufacturing realities, would essentially trade reliance on, say, volatile Middle Eastern oil markets.
For a deep, highly concentrated dependency on a single geostrategic competitor for the key material, silicon, and also tellurium, copper.
This reframing, then, it directly reinforces that huge $550 billion U.S.-Japan framework that was established earlier this year.
It absolutely does. That partnership is fundamentally a strategic directive aimed at building allied, diversified nuclear supply chains, leveraging Japan's world-class industrial capability, especially for the large, heavy-forged components that the U.S. industrial base currently struggles to produce at scale. The critical minerals list provides the data-driven national security justification for this coordinated allied pivot back towards nuclear power.
And this convergence of policy, it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. We're seeing international alignment building, too.
Definitely. In Europe, the European Commission launched a formal call for evidence this week, specifically to shape its own upcoming small modular reactor strategy.
So Europe is getting serious about SMRs, too.
Very serious. They're aiming for initial deployments in the early 2030s, and they note that over 10 EU member states have already expressed strong interest. They're laying the policy groundwork now to ensure SMRs can be integrated smoothly into their national energy and climate plans, explicitly recognizing nuclear strategic value for both decarbonization and energy independence from, for example, Russian gas.
Speaking of Russia, geopolitically, we saw Hungary make a significant move this week.
Yes, Hungary signed a $114 million contract directly with Westinghouse to diversify the fuel supply for its existing PAX nuclear power plant.
Which historically has relied entirely on Russian fuel fabrication.
Correct. This is a very direct move to reduce that dependency, underscoring how advanced nuclear technology and fuel services are actively being used as diplomatic and strategic tools to reduce vulnerabilities among allied nations.
Okay. Policy, supply chains, geopolitics. But there's one more critical bottleneck that comes up constantly in the research compiled by our team. People. Having the skilled workforce to actually build and operate all this new stuff.
The human capital challenge, it's huge, and potentially the biggest break on these accelerated timelines if not addressed proactively, which is why the announcement out of Ohio this week is so important.
What did Ohio announce?
They launched a $100 million energy opportunity initiative.
$100 million? For what specifically?
It's explicitly designed to do two things. First, attract SMR manufacturing supply chain companies to set up shop in Ohio. And second, to fund site preparation and, critically, workforce training programs.
It sounds like smart strategic thinking, getting ahead of the problem.
It really is. It recognizes that you can sign deals for $80 billion worth of reactors, you can fast-track regulations, but unless you have enough skilled, certified nuclear-grade welders, electricians, engineers, project managers, operators, the entire enterprise grinds to a halt.
So Ohio is basically trying to solve the industrial execution problem before it cripples the deployment schedule.
That's the goal. By proactively investing in building that human capital ecosystem now, they're signaling to global nuclear manufacturers, come here, we'll have the skilled workforce ready for you. This long-term focus on workforce development is absolutely essential if the industry is going to prove that the standardized, factory-built SMR fleet model can actually be delivered repeatably and cost-effectively.
And for those of you watching on YouTube, if you're finding this insightful, please do take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Tomorrow Unveiled, and maybe consider hitting that new hype button. Apparently it helps us reach more viewers. And of course, make sure you turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the future we're exploring here. The scale of these developments requires constant attention, and we're committed to providing that deep analysis for you.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the key takeaways from the research our team compiled this week. It seems clear the green code, this explosive high-density power demand, primarily from the AI and digital economy, is now the definitive catalyst.
It's forcing this rapid, policy-backed pivot to what we're calling the hot core, high-density, firm, clean power.
Yeah, and the evidence is piling up. We see it in the $80 billion U.S. Westinghouse industrial partnership, the massive 6GW TVA ENTRA1 SMR deal, that really innovative Google PPA model for restarting a plant.
And even in the dramatically accelerated fusion roadmap, now targeting commercial power by the mid-2030s.
Right. It feels like the era of debating whether high-density, firm, clean power is needed is basically over.
It's shifted from a debate to an industrial imperative, backed by huge amounts of capital finally aligning. But that brings us sharply to the new challenge, doesn't it?
It does. The risk profile has shifted dramatically. It feels like the primary risk is no longer in policy uncertainty or lack of investment. It's now concentrated almost entirely in industrial execution.
Can we actually build all this stuff on time and on budget?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question. The ability of the U.S. and its allies to actually meet these incredibly accelerated timelines, SMRs widely deployed by the early 2030s, maybe even initial fusion power plants by the mid-2030s, it all hinges on scaling up manufacturing capacity rapidly.
Securing that specialized workforce, like Ohio is trying to do.
And proving, decisively, that the new standardized factory-built model for SMRs can actually avoid the crippling cost overruns and decade-long delays that plagued so many large nuclear projects in the past. The industry absolutely must deliver on its promise of repeatability this time.
The high-density future clearly requires the hot core. The demand is non-negotiable. The technology is racing to meet it.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. Given that the U.S. DOE, as we discussed, is now actively creating parallel regulatory pathways like that nuclear reactor pilot program, specifically to accelerate deployment.
Essentially finding ways to bypass or compress the traditional multi-decade NRC process, all in the name of speed.
The question is, will these necessary compromises on historical processes, on perhaps traditional layers of risk tolerance, be viewed by history as strategic genius? The key move that won the AI energy race and met climate goals? Or could they potentially be seen down the line as a strategic liability if something were to go wrong in this unprecedented rush to deploy?
That distinction, strategic genius versus strategic liability, that feels like the razor's edge the entire energy industry and indeed society is walking right now.
It really does.
We genuinely love hearing your thoughts on these pivotal moments. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, please leave a comment and let us know what you think about Green Code, Hot Core, the future of advanced nuclear energy, and that critical question of speed versus risk.
Thank you for joining us on Tomorrow Unveiled.
We'll keep exploring the future right here on Tomorrow Unveiled.